Energy is one of the biggest sectors in world economy. We need to decarbonize many aspects. But even when I joined the fight about a decade ago, the climate fight, it was already pretty clear that solar and wind were going to go on an exponential decline of their production, of their electricity costs. And that would be a very good tool set to decarbonize our society. We basically decarbonized natural gas to produce clean hydrogen. And I got into this space really by working with an incubator in Seattle to tackle hard to decarbonize problems. Energy is one of the biggest sectors in world economy. We need to decarbonize many aspects. But even when I joined the fight about a decade ago, the climate fight, it was already pretty clear that solar and wind were going to go on an exponential decline of their production, of their electricity costs. And that would be a very good tool set to decarbonize our society. But it was also very clear to experts that that was not enough. To give you a sense, right, like only 1/3 of CO2 emissions are associated with electricity. And even for that, most experts don't think solar and wind can get us 100% of the way there. And even if it could, again, that's only 1/3 of the picture. So you need all these additional new tool sets and technologies to tackle the hard to decarbonize sectors. I work with an incubator to investigate many of those problems, and that led to the creation of Modern Hydrogen.
I know in the past we had talked a little bit about kind of how your company works, kind of figuring out what is the optimal way to do it. And at one point we talked about our natural gas grid in the US and how it's the largest, I believe, in the world. And are there ways to potentially leverage that? Are you still focusing on that, or is there kind of a new approach to how you think about scaling your company?
That's still right. I would say if there's two words to describe the value prop of what our company is doing, it's skip infrastructure. Here's the gist. Hydrogen is seen as the holy grail fuel because it's pretty much the only fuel you can burn without any CO2 emissions. So that's why there's a lot of investment and discussion and hype in the sector. But hydrogen has an Achilles heel. It's the lightest element in the universe. That makes it very hard to transport and distribute. I'm talking about moving around and storing it. To give you a sense of some numbers, if you compressed hydrogen as a gas to like a compressed tank and compare it with the same gasoline tank by volume, the hydrogen tank would only have 10% the energy compared to the gasoline tank. Again, it's just because hydrogen is very light, like per unit volume, it does not contain a lot of energy. You could move it around as a liquid if you cool it to very low temperatures, but the issue is you need to get to negative 250 Celsius before hydrogen turns from a gas to liquid. So it is exceedingly expensive and impractical to try to turn hydrogen into liquid and move it around that way. And so last but not least, you can move hydrogen around with pipes. And we do know how to do that, but you need brand new pipes. To give you a sense, the country today probably has less than 2,000 miles of dedicated hydrogen pipelines. In contrast, we already have 3 million miles of natural gas pipelines in the United States alone. So that took $1 trillion and a whole century to build up, but you cannot reuse that to transport hydrogen directly. You would have to spend another century and probably another $1 trillion to build up infrastructure to move hydrogen around to the same scale of natural gas. So we tech nerds sort of took a look at this and realized, hey, natural gas, its chemical composition is CH4, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogen. So it's already majority hydrogen. We're already moving all this hydrogen around. It's just stuck to this pesky carbon atom that we don't like because when we burn it, it emits CO2 that causes global warming. So we're thinking, hey, why don't you just reuse all that infrastructure? The gas is already being transported to the end user. At the very last point of the pipe, pull out the carbon atom, then you're just left with clean hydrogen. Then you can get hydrogen to all these different places across the country without any need to build new infrastructure. Not only is that going to be a lot cheaper for the delivered price of hydrogen, but we think this can decarbonize, frankly, a lot faster. Because again, if you're going to wait for the pipelines to be built, new ones, you're probably, you and I will be dead by the time that's built up. So this is why we like our approach.
And back to the historical concerns around hydrogen is moving it around, right? And I love the fact that we have such an abundant grid that you can tap into, and now you're minimizing the need to move hydrogen around. And now you can also give it these other practical applications. So, battery technology, it's awesome. There's so much innovation and investment in that space. The downside of batteries is they're really heavy. And so, there's this company, Universal Hydrogen, which I think is great. It was the former CTO of Airbus, and he's he's going to retrofit, these jets that will run on hydrogen. That's probably the only way to decarbonize airplanes. You cannot put batteries in planes. It's way too heavy. It's just not going to work. Same thing with trucks and fleets. And I read that article this last week at GeekWire. Kenworth has they're announcing this new hydrogen fuel truck, and all of these big heavy trucks are going to run on hydrogen. Again, it makes sense because you're not going to have 10-ton batteries in these things. So now the challenge, back to what you're addressing, which I think makes a lot of sense, is like, okay, how do we just tap into it? If that truck's driving across the country, is there a way to get on the side of the road? And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how your company is now converting this natural gas to hydrogen and how you see that happening. But I think that makes a ton of sense because everyone's always scared of the Hindenburg. It's the first thing you mentioned hydrogen to people, like, oh, things are going to blow up. But if you can minimize the amount of the hydrogen is actually traveling to be able to utilize it, then I think it creates a safer environment.
Oh, it'd be way safer, right? So that's exactly one of the applications of hydrogen, right? Like we have a lot of interest in building hydrogen refueling stations. So there'll be other companies downstream that are building the hydrogen trucks, hydrogen planes. That's not what we're in charge of. But we're in charge of, for example, making sure that there's hydrogen supply, that these refueling stations and stuff like that exist. And so it's kind of crazy. Today, there's been some effort to build the hydrogen refueling stations, but most hydrogen today is made in some centralized plant far, far away and shipped hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 miles to the refueling station. Number one, as you've noticed, right? Like, well, now you're like literally today, because there's no pipes, they truck the hydrogen. That's a lot of hydrogen being going on highways at very large volumes, which of course, if you're concerned about safety, that's not super safe.
Don't run into that truck.
Yeah. Second of all, right, the prices are crazy. If you went to like a hydrogen refueling station in like LA, you'd probably be paying like $15 per kilogram for the hydrogen. And that probably took less than 1.5 or $1 per kilogram to make. So the entire cost of the hydrogen you actually pay for, it's almost all the logistical cost of getting the hydrogen there. It's not the initial production cost. So that's the cost that we're trying to avoid by producing hydrogen on site wherever you can tap into a natural gas line.